Welcome to the Elijah Rising podcast. Elijah Rising is an organization empowering women recovering from sexual exploitation. This episode is going to help you become more aware about the issue of sex trafficking and inspire you to take action.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Adam, and today I am joined by Munatsi Manyande, and he is the executive director of the DFW Asylum-Seeker Housing Network, also known as the DASH Network. Munatsi was born and raised in Zimbabwe. He has a finance degree and an MBA from the University of Central Missouri. Munatsi has worked in both the business and nonprofit sectors in both Africa and in the United States, and he has been the executive director of the DASH Network since July of 2018. Munatsi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. We're so excited that you're here today. And because we're asking the question, how are asylum seeking and exploitation related? And so I think it's important for our audience first, just to kind of set the stage before we jump into like the real meat and bones of the conversation. Let's define what it means to be an asylum seeker. And are asylum seekers the same thing as refugees?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great place to start. The best way I can think of to kind of explain, what an asylum seeker is and the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee is by giving, kind of the background that an asylum seeker is somebody who's had to, flee their home country out of fear of persecution. And it's, typically, fear of persecution because of their race, because their religion, sometimes their nationality, political opinion. So, if you come from a country with a brutal dictatorship and you are opposed to said brutal dictatorship, sometimes that does lead to trouble, that people have to flee to save their lives.
Sure. Yeah.
And then also, membership to a particular social group. So, sometimes that could mean, just being a member of an organization that is targeted, or, sometimes LGBTQ, individuals in different parts of the world are targeted.
Yeah.
And then tribes as well. We see people that are part of a minority tribe in a particular country have to flee, for their own safety. So an asylum seeker typically will flee kind of on their own. So it's an individual or, an individual and their family.
Gotcha.
They pack up and then they get out the country and then they make their way to the United States. And then on arrival in the United States, they start the process to where they say to the U.S. government, hey, I'm here with my family, I'm here by myself, and I don't feel safe to, returning home for the following reasons.
Right.
I'm going to seek asylum. And that kind of, starts an entire process on its own that could take several years, from start to finish.
Sure.
So an asylum seeker, kind of goes through all of that, and moves, finds their way to the U.S., on their own or with just their family.
Yeah.
The refugee, on the other hand, is typically fleeing. Sometimes it's persecution because of, them, being members of a particular, race or nationality, or, a certain tribe, or, converting to a certain religion, those kinds of things. But then they generally are targeted kind of en masse, so as part of a larger group.
Oh, gotcha.
So the typical refugee, ends up fleeing, en masse as part of a group. So, for example, there's the conflict happening right now in Ethiopia, where there's this, civil war that's breaking out. And so that's caused, displacement of large numbers of families and individuals from certain parts of the country.
Gotcha.
And so when they're displaced in large numbers, they typically either make their way across the border, somewhere, or to a safe part of the country. And a lot of times the United Nations, kind of shows up and helps set up these refugee camps. Temporary housing, temporary accommodation for these thousands of people. Sometimes tens of thousands.
Sure.
And then The United Nations then works with, the United States and a number of other countries to basically kind of say, okay, look, so we've got, these people, these thousands of people that are, here in our camp that don't have, they can't go back home because it's not safe for them to go back home, or, their homes have been destroyed and there's nothing to go back to potentially.
Right. Yeah.
And so we need to make a plan for them. And so the United States and a number of other countries will typically, essentially announce to say, hey, for 2021, we'll take 20,000 refugees or 50,000 or 100,000, whatever that number is. And through the United Nations, different families and individuals, kind of just are told by that, hey, you're going to the United States, or you're going to go to Germany, or you're going to go to Canada, or, that kind of thing. And so the United Nations is involved in that whole process. There's a lot of, background checks, verification of identity and stuff that's done through them. And then they kind of work with the US government to actually process travel documents and actually get these families on flights.
Gotcha.
Into the United States. And so when, if you show up in the United States as a refugee, the US knows who you are before you get here. They've kind of, done their background checks and all of that stuff. And the US government typically has, contracted a number of refugee agencies, in the country to kind of assist you as you arrive. And so what happens is when, I'll give the Dallas example, because we've got, significant refugee populations in Dallas and Fort Worth, over here. And so when somebody arrives as a refugee and flies in, to DFW International Airport, there's a refugee resettlement agency that's waiting for them. So somebody's at the airport, expecting them. They've got a sign with their name on a board.
Wow.
And once they've been processed, through immigration and customs, somebody's, receives them. Somebody helps them, with whatever luggage they might have, puts them in a car and drives them straight to an apartment that the refugee resettlement agency has rented on their behalf.
Gotcha.
And so you're walking into an apartment, so you're in a new country, new home, but you're walking into an apartment that the resettlement agency has helped furnish and all of that. And they've put some groceries in there. So and they, drop you off and it's, hey, welcome to your new home.
Right. Right.
And then the government will provide, I think the government pays for, up to about 6 months, in terms of rent and that kind of thing, for that apartment. And then this resettlement agency assists by, kind of helping you, as quickly as possible. Okay, so you're here, you've already got the right to be in the US and the right to work and all this. So they help you get your social security number and all of that stuff. They help you get your kids in school. They help you, if there's, some language barriers, they're trying to help you get into some, ESL, courses and those kinds of things.
Right.
And they can help you, get on your feet. They, eventually will help you find a job once you've got your social security number and all of this, with the idea of within 6 months, you need to be,
stable.
relatively stable, and able to, you're going to work and, so the government's paid for your, for 6 months of your rent. They've given you a monthly stipend as well for you and your family.
Right.
And after 6 months, hopefully you can take over from there. So that's typically kind of the journey that a refugee will go through. And it's tough because from the time that they're displaced to the time they finally get to the United States, it's possibly several years. Sometimes refugees spend 3 to 5 years in a refugee camp,
right?
Just basically living in tents.
Right.
So, very difficult circumstances that they're forced to endure. And when they arrive here, it's new country, new everything, and many times not much language, not much languages in common, and so you're really scrambling, trying to kind of get sorted out. The slight advantage that refugees have relative to asylum seekers is that you do have these resettlement agencies that are expecting you and that are helping you to be able to, to kind of find your feet, somewhat. Okay.
It's like, it's almost like they have a government funded support network to help them get acclimated to their new kind of cultural setting. And
exactly.
I feel what's coming next. I'm thinking that asylum seekers, it's not that easy.
100% correct. Yeah. You're on the money with that statement. So what happens is, because an asylum seeker is fleeing, by themselves as an individual, or, it's just, me and my family, kind of thing.
Right.
There's two options for you, in terms of coming to the United States to seek asylum. Okay. The first process, the government calls the affirmative process.
Okay.
And the people that go through the affirmative asylum process are generally people who, qualified from their home countries to get a visa to visit the United States. So I qualified to get a visitor's visa or a student visa or
right.
Something along those lines. And so I got a visa at my local embassy in my home country. I got on a plane. I arrived. I went through immigration, as a visitor, processed through immigration and everything like that. And then once I'm in the country, I've gone through immigration and I'm in the United States, I go and I say, hey, look, to the government, I'm here to seek asylum, and here,
right.
Here are the reasons why I don't feel safe returning to my home country.
Right.
And so that's the affirmative, kind of asylum process, and that's the first way that you are able to, seek asylum. The second way is called the defensive asylum process.
Okay.
And the defensive asylum process, applies to people that aren't able to get a visa, to travel to the United States. And 95% of, maybe even 99% of asylum applications are probably, defensive. I mean, it's a high number.
Wow.
Of them being defensive. So they, I either, didn't get the visa, or I couldn't even drive to the city where the U.S. embassy is at to try to get a visa because of everything that was going on.
Right.
So I just fled. So I fled, managed to cross the border into a neighboring country, and then I started to make my way to the United States. These are a lot of the stories that have been, kind of captured in the news over the last couple of years, when you
right.
heard about these migrant, trains, and these groups of thousands of asylum seekers showing up, traveling through Central America, through
right.
Mexico.
The caravans, right?
The caravans, exactly.
Yeah,
that's the word I was looking for. And so what happens is with them is when you show up as part of this caravan to the U.S. border, the southern border. Mm-hmm. Again, international law, which every country in the world that's a signatory to the United Nations Refugee Treaty.
Gotcha.
Basically, all the countries have said, hey, if a citizen of another country shows up at my border and says, hey, I'm here to seek asylum, I need help, that there's kind of an agreed upon way of treating these individuals, and kind of giving them an opportunity to present their case.
Yeah.
And get an answer of, okay, you qualify for asylum, welcome, right. You can stay in the U.S. or you don't, and you've got to go back.
Right.
So when you show up at the U.S. The southern border and you don't have a visa, you are able to say to the to Border Patrol, hey, I'm here, I don't have a visa, but I do want to enter the United States to seek asylum.
Right. Right.
And that in itself, triggers a process.
Right.
That's different from the affirmative asylum process, but the ultimate end result is asylum being granted or being denied. And if it's granted, you get to stay in the United States, you become a permanent resident eventually, and a U.S. citizen eventually. And if the asylum is denied, then you've got to leave and go back home or go somewhere else.
Right, right. So I know that your work is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is about 4 hours north of us, from where I sit at this moment. But I'm hoping you can speak to this. But like, are asylum seekers here in Houston? I mean, clearly they're, in Dallas, which is not far away. And is this only is it only big cities, big municipalities that are taking asylum seekers? This is like a country, nationwide deal.
That's a really good question. Asylum seekers are everywhere. To be honest, I know there's asylum seekers in small towns across the U.S.
Okay.
There's, asylum seekers everywhere. Now, what typically happens, and I'll kind of, explain this and then segue to kind of explaining, what I touched on earlier.
Sure.
The question you asked about, asylum seekers not quite getting the kind of support that refugees do get. Yeah. So once an asylum seeker gets in and they're at the, show up at the border, Border Patrol, starts a process. And typically for most asylum seekers, at least adult asylum seekers, the first thing that happens is you're brought into the United States, but you're put into detention. into a detention facility.
Right.
And, the reason they're doing that is just to kind of be able to, you're showing up and you're saying, hey, this is who I am, but there's no way to verify.
Yeah. You can't process it in, in an hour or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they put you in detention and then try to kind of work quickly to kind of, get a bit more information about you, where you're coming from, and the reason why you don't feel safe returning to your country.
Right.
And a lot of times what happens is at the bare minimum, the government has immigration officers that actually work in these detention centers who's part of what they do is determine who has a credible fear of returning home and who doesn't.
Yeah.
So you get interviewed and you've got to produce some evidence and anything that you can shows that you're to support your claim. And if they feel like you do have a credible fear, then you're essentially processed out of detention. Where they say, okay, look, we're not granting you asylum right now, but
right.
we do feel you have a credible fear, and so you do deserve an opportunity to stand in front of a judge and make your case.
Gotcha.
And so they'll kind of process them out that way. But if you're deemed to not have a credible fear, then that's about it. Basically, you got to go.
The process is over.
Process is over. Yeah. So once someone's been deemed to have a credible fear and they're released from detention, the big shock for many people is that you technically can just be released and it's, hey, okay, you're out of detention. Good luck. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Okay. And for a lot of people who are coming and seeking asylum, they know absolutely no one. They don't have anyone they know in this country. They don't,
sure.
Or if they do, we've had people who said, well, I was given somebody, the name of somebody from my town who I was told was in Minneapolis. And so I have this phone number. And so my plan was just to call them once I arrived. And I tried their number and lo and behold, the number doesn't work. And I don't know what I'm going to do. So there's, kind of a lot of those instances. And so the reason that a lot of times people end up going to the bigger cities is because, they are looking for a community of people from their country, or at least kind of this idea of, look, I feel like my chances of getting help are probably going to be stronger in Houston, Texas,
sure,
versus Eastland, Texas.
Yeah.
Just in terms of just the size of the city and some of the infrastructure that's there, to support large numbers of people. So, I
was gonna say, or like if for example, if you're seeking let's say you're a Cambodian and you're an asylum seeker and you come and that there's a large Cambodian community in Houston, you might have like a third cousin once removed, some distant connection,
precisely
in this community of other people who have also sought asylum. Gotcha. Okay.
Precisely. Yeah. So you'll find that different cities across the country, that have significant numbers of people from certain countries generally kind of are, attract, more people from those countries just naturally.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's a real factor. Now, going back to the defensive and the asylum, affirmative asylum processes. So in both cases, so the affirmative asylum seeker has come into the country. They've been processed into the U.S. with their visitor's visa, and they seek, apply for asylum. And, most people thinking, hey, I'm in America. This is America. America has a reputation for being, if not the most organized country in the world, if not, or close to it, and so on. So surely I'm going to be able to submit this application for asylum, and that's going to be, I'm either going to be able to get some support to get some help from the government, just, as I'm going through the process, or I'm going to at least be able to kind of get an expedited work permit or something. So at least I can find work and start working, kind of while the process is playing out. Because, people find out it takes a couple of years before your asylum decision is given. So everyone's assumption is surely I'm going to get some help, or I'm going to be allowed to work so I can, take care of myself. So every single person that gets here is not pleasantly, is shocked, and not in a pleasant way.
Yeah.
When they find out that actually, now that you've put in this asylum application, you've got to wait. And you might wait 6 months, but you might also wait 4 years. There's no telling.
Yeah.
And while you're waiting, you're not you don't qualify for any government benefits. You don't qualify for, food stamps or any assistance in the way that refugees do qualify.
Right.
And then you also can't work for a significant amount of time, for a
Right.
year or two, even sometimes before, from the time you arrive.
Wow.
And so what that does is create this real crisis.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've come here, to save my life. I've made it, and as soon as I showed up, I didn't try to sneak into the country
Right.
and just kind of, be illegal. So I've kind of, done it the way that I, do the way the rules say I should do it.
Yeah.
And so the government knows who I am. They know where to find me. They know my story and all this stuff. And I'm not trying to hide from anyone. But I've been told I've got to potentially sit for 2 years,
with no way to resource yourself.
No support.
Yeah,
exactly. And so some guys are here with their families, and so now you're looking at your spouse and kids and trying to think, okay, so what are we going to do? No answer. A lot of people come, where it's just maybe the mom or just the dad, and they left their spouse and kids in their home country.
Yeah.
And typically, they were the breadwinner too for their family. And so now it's like, okay, so I'm homeless, and I'm potentially in this situation for 2 or 4 years, and I have no capacity to send any money to my family that I just left back home. So, so it creates a real crisis. And so this is kind of, where Dash, kind of, essentially, comes in. This is why we exist. Our founder, her name is Ashley Freeman, actually worked for a refugee resettlement agency.
Okay.
Over 10 years ago. And she was a young, recent college graduate and was working there and loved working with refugees. And that's kind of what she felt, kind of called to do with her life. And one day, 2 young ladies from Rwanda walk in to their office, and they need help. And initially they start to kind of talk with them and start processing them as refugees, only to discover that no, these young ladies were not in the country as refugees. They were actually asylum seekers. And so because they were a refugee resettlement agency, they were not able to provide any of their services to them because they were classified as asylum seekers and not refugees.
Right.
And so, they couldn't help them. And this lady, her and her husband have the most amazing hearts and big hearts, for sure. So she takes both these ladies home with them and kind of says, hey, come home with me. I'm sure, over the next few days, I'll do some research. I'm sure I'll find an organization that helps asylum seekers, and I'll be happy to take you to them. And surely, Dallas Fort Worth, there's millions of people here.
Right.
Surely there's an organization that can help. And so that's what they did. So she took him home. She'd only been married, I think, about 6 weeks. That and she shows up to their apartment with these two women that she just met that day. It's a crazy story.
Yeah.
Long story short. She then finds out that there wasn't a single organization in Dallas Fort Worth. In fact, not a single organization in all of North Texas or any of the large cities in Texas that provided housing support to asylum seekers. So these 2 ladies end up staying with them for a few months until eventually they're able to help them kind of get their own apartment and then kind of set that up. And then that led to, these 2 ladies that had been helped, whenever they'd meet someone who was an asylum seeker who needed help, they'd give them Ashley Freeman's number. And all all these people to say, hey, you help asylum seekers that, that don't have a work permit and don't have any money and, can help themselves.
Wow.
And so that's kind of how, how Dash, came to be. She would eventually go and approach her church here in Fort Worth. And they would start a ministry within the church, that, to help asylum seekers. And that's how Dash was born. And then about 5 years ago, we had kind of continued to grow as a ministry and needed to kind of get to a place where we kind of stand alone and, kind of spread our wings beyond just, this one church that we were working from. And so we started the process to become a standalone nonprofit and get our 501c3 status and so on. And long story, and so, and then fast forward a few years and we're here now, been able to help close to 200 asylum seekers. And, what we do is essentially similar to what the government is doing for refugees, through the resettlement agencies, where if you come in and you're a legitimate asylum seeker, and we have ways and, to kind of check and vet, and we have lawyers too that help us with that process. And if you're deemed to be a legitimate asylum seeker, you can come into Dash and we'll give you a place to stay. We'll give you food to eat. We'll pay all the bills. and provide you with a community to be a part of.
Wow.
Without ever asking you for a penny.
Yeah.
Until you get your work permit. And then once you get your work permit, we'll also give you a 6-month runway, 5 to 6 month runway, kind of like refugees get, where now you've got a work permit. So we'll help you find work, and we'll kind of just try to help you plan your life. And then, before that 6 months is up, we graduate you and kind of help you go set yourself up in your own apartment and kind of start moving forward that way.
That's incredible. You're doing incredible work. Thanks. I know we just kind of give a lot of space on the podcast here for you to do a lot of explaining on the front end. And I think it's so critical for the listeners and the viewers right now to understand that, like, this isn't the typical rhythm that the podcast goes in, but it was so important to create the space for you, Munatsi, to explain how the process works, and specifically, what the difference is between asylum seeking and refugees. And because that really does set up the realities of the difficulties, the vulnerabilities of asylum seekers throughout that entire process, start to finish, from when they decide to make a run for it, if that's the proper language, to even if they do make it into the United States and still being vulnerable. And so I think that's kind of the turn I want to take is, you've kind of touched on it and alluded to it a little bit, but just you kind of want to make it even more clear, what makes asylum seekers especially vulnerable to commercial sexual exploitation?
That's a great question. I think there's the foundational element, or the key thing for me in all this, is just the desperation. Because, when you've had to, flee your home country, so you said goodbye to your family, sometimes didn't even get a chance to say goodbye properly. You just have to get out. Because things got really bad really quickly. So you had to leave. Nobody plans on leaving their home country unless they have to. That's been my experience. Okay.
Yeah, no one wants to abandon their home and their comfort zone for funsies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
Right.
Especially if you're going to do it, you're probably going to try to make a plan in advance. You're going to try to save some money and at least, have some structure around it.
Sure.
So whenever these things happen, it's typically, a sudden escalation in events, and I need to get out of here. So, some of the people that we've served, some of the stories that we've heard over the years, in Dash is story of we had a young lady whose dad was in the government in an African country, and he refused to kind of endorse or participate in something brutal that was supposed to be done to some opposition activists or whatever.
Yeah,
and because he refused, they came after him, and he went into hiding.
Yeah. And
in looking for him, they come over to his house, and his wife and daughters are home, and they decide that they're looking for him, and they want to teach him a lesson, and also whatever, I don't know what logic obviously is working in a situation like this, but they basically end up raping his wife, these girls' moms, and made the kids watch. And then once they were done with that, shot her in the head. Killed
wow. Oh my gosh.
And then, leave a message to say, hey, we know you know where your dad is. And if you guys don't, get word to him and tell him to turn himself in, we're coming back, and whatever you've just seen us do to your mom, we're doing to you guys, basically.
Yeah.
So they end up in a really difficult situation where, okay, mom's dead, now we're in danger too, and if dad turns himself in and shows up, he's basically just walking into his own. He's dead. He's getting killed.
Right.
And so it's not safe for them. And at that point too, the dad was part of the intelligence, community in the country. And so, we don't even know where we can go where we might be safe
because law enforcement is looking for him, and the people that you would normally trust in a situation like that, you can't actually trust. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So anyway, so they end up, we've got to get out of here, and so they leave, and they end up spending a few months in a neighboring country, essentially trying to find money, raise money, to kind of find a way to maybe, get over here. And what typically happens is, and a lot of people have asked me this question to say, hey, so if you can technically go and apply for asylum anywhere in the world, what is it that causes people to come to the US? And I've had one person say to me, look, if I'm going to have to leave my home country, and if I'm going to have to flee my community and kind of go somewhere where I have to start over, I feel like I might as well take my chances and try to find a way to get to the US, because I do feel like if I get to the US and if I am granted asylum, the US probably gives me and my family the best opportunity to actually start over and make the best of what's an entirely horrible situation.
Sure.
So I've had kind of people express that. So they end up working for 5 months, for several months, I think, in this neighboring country. I'll be honest with you, I didn't have the guts to ask what kind of work they were doing. I mean, I just don't know. And it wouldn't surprise me if there was some significant sexual exploitation just in that.
Sure.
Okay. Sure. They end up finding their way to Central America and joining, a caravan that's coming up to the southern border. And even in that, we're hearing them tell that they didn't have enough money. And so I have no idea, some of the bus rides they had to get on or some of the places they needed to stay. I don't know what they were made to do, in order to be able to, to kind of, make it here eventually. All I know is just from once they got here and once they were kind of going through the asylum process and came into Dash, all we knew was they needed, some very significant counseling and significant help because of the trauma that they'd been through, both at home and, on their way, traveling to the United States. So desperation, I think, is the big thing. That makes asylum seekers vulnerable to sexual exploitation and then other types of exploitation as well.
Well, those are the types of conversations that we have, all the time in our work, because people ask us, like, well, how do people get into trafficking? Like, what leads to people, being sex trafficked? And my preferred definition of sex trafficking and what I often tell people to try to get them to understand the complex realities that lead to an individual's exploitation is sex trafficking is the exploitation of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And the situation that you're describing for asylum seekers is like it's nonstop vulnerability from the second that the process begins of needing to flee wherever that place is. Yes. It is like a constant state of vulnerability that would lead that individual just out of sheer need to survive, perhaps in some cases, to do what it takes. And
it really is.
And potentially work with other individuals who don't have your well-being, right, as a priority, just to survive or to get enough money to rescue your father or get enough money to get to the next border crossing or whatever the case may be. And so I think this is a great lead in to the conversation, and we're going to take a break in the podcast as we normally do here. But on the other side, we're going to talk about what makes asylum seekers especially vulnerable after they reach the United States. And we're just going to continue our conversation with Munatsi of Dash Network. We'll see you in just a minute.
4 years ago, we started making candles in my kitchen because we had a dream to empower women recovering from sex trafficking. After years of growing, changing, and perfecting what we truly believe to be the perfect candle, we now sell goods across the country that empower women who are recovering from sex trafficking. And we want you to help us so that we can give more jobs to women that are in our program. Go to shop.elijahrising.org and you can see some of the most amazing goods you've ever tried, as well as empower the next woman to have a future after sex trafficking. And we have a special code for all of our podcast listeners. Just use the code PODCAST when you check out for a special discount.
Hey, welcome back. Munatsi, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and just talk, continue this conversation though about like the vulnerabilities that asylum seekers are experiencing. And specifically, I kind of want to shift us to like, what does it look like after they arrive in the United States? Again, what Dash Network is doing is incredible. And I understand like you guys are trying to reduce and minimize those vulnerabilities, but, there's major cities and towns and asylum seekers going in and out of the country everywhere, and there's not a Dash network everywhere, right? So let's talk about that. What kind of vulnerabilities are you seeing after asylum seekers arrive, and how does that kind of contribute to sexual exploitation?
Yeah, really good question, Adam. The desperation we were talking about before the break, is just breeding ground for vulnerability, as you put it, because when you arrive, you've made it into the United States. The government knows who you are. They know you're here to apply for asylum. So now you're free to go, in the U.S. and kind of figure things out. But you've got to figure things out on your own. Yeah. And like I said, and most people, you didn't have much money when you left. Right. And what little money that you had, you used up on the way, and maybe you've been exploited and been taken advantage of along the way too. And so finally you're here, and you initially thought being let out of detention was a good thing, like you actually celebrate that. But in some cases, it's almost like, wait a minute, at least when I was in detention, I actually had a roof over my head. I was safe, and I knew I was going to get a meal, every few hours. And now I've got to figure this thing out on my own. And so that's a real problem. You're just in such a vulnerable state. I'm going to read a quote from, one of our great. One of our lady residents that we had in Dash in the past, who, when asked about, hey, look, so just tell us about what it was like, once you knew that, okay, I'm going to be able to stay in the U.S. and go through the asylum process, and, kind of what that meant. And, she says, I was so desperate for a place to live that I went to an apartment complex and I knocked on the doors. And I asked everyone if there was a person who could help me and give me a place to stay. The only man who offered me a place to stay wanted me to be a prostitute, but I could not do that, so I could not stay. And that's, candid conversation where you knock on doors. Most people not going to open the door to a stranger, first of all. Yeah. And then the ones that do, when they do open the door and it's like, oh, it's a young woman on her own, unfortunately, not every person out there is thinking about doing the right thing. Some people are seeing an opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Yeah. Unfortunately. So there's that, that situation where, she said she wasn't willing to do it, and she left. And so she ended up enduring, some days of homelessness, until she was able to, find her way to Dash. But, it scares me to think of how many women, end up in that situation, or even men, men and women who end up in those situations. Yeah. And then out of that desperation of thinking, what am I going to do? Because the idea of being, of being homeless, is not an idea, it's not anything that any one of us is going to, take lightly or accept easily.
Or even starving, right? I mean, like a roof is one thing, but you can sleep outside. But like you can't go many days without food and water.
Exactly. So there's that. There's no. So you're very insecure about your food situation. Very insecure about how you're going to live. The other thing that's happening too is when you're going through asylum and immigration kind of when they release you from detention to kind of start your asylum process. You're also expected to have a fixed address within a very short space of time that you notify the government of, and all this different stuff. So there's all these different things where technically, if you don't do things by the book, you could potentially, mess up your asylum application, by not following the rules, not because you didn't intend to, but you really didn't have anywhere to go. Yeah. So it opens that up, and then most of the residents, the people that are here going through asylum that we help, have also been through some very significant trauma in their lives. I told the story earlier of the sisters that had to watch
Yeah.
their mother being raped and then murdered, and there's that, we've had, residents in our program that themselves have been tortured, physically tortured and all of that. We've had women, who've been raped just because they were from a tribe that somebody decided was inferior, and those kinds of things. We've had those situations. We've had women, enter our program pregnant with a baby from the actual rape that took place that led them to having to flee their home country. And now we're trying to help somebody find their feet and kind of find a home and kind of just figure things out. But they're also carrying this baby that, is a result of a very brutal rape experience. And, just trying to manage that. And, I don't even know where I'd start, if I was in that situation and trying to navigate through that. So it's really difficult. And then again, like I said earlier, most people got to wait 2.5 years, maybe 3 years before you finally get a work permit in your hands to be able to start working.
Yeah.
And so again, that just, is more opportunities for people to take advantage of you or people to be exploited. I mean, we've heard stories of asylum seekers who end up, because they're desperate, they end up accepting, kind of a job of, hey, look, I'll do anything to just so I can have a place to sleep and food to eat. And they basically, end up entering into a form of slavery where they're being made to work 20 hours a day and being told that their pay is the floor that they get to sleep on and, a couple of pieces of bread every day, and that's it, but they've actually got to work. So those situations, happen, and it's just exploitation, through and through, but also while trying to cope with the trauma and the PTSD of what you've been through, you're also struggling with the, just the separation anxiety. You're separated from your family, from what you're familiar with. And in many cases, you don't even speak English, or you don't speak any English or Spanish. And so you're in this situation where you need help, but you don't even have the words to ask for help because you don't know any of the language. I mean, it's just so many difficult, kind of elements that are coming together, to kind of just create this perfect storm where, if you end up in the wrong hands, you are definitely going to be exploited one way or the other.
Yeah. And, from our work, and, we obviously specifically work in the area of anti-trafficking, but like we are very aware of the tactics and the strategies that traffickers use to recruit women, men, children, to serve their nefarious purposes, right? And it always begins with identifying an individual's vulnerability and exploiting that vulnerability, sometimes very subtly at the beginning. Like maybe it is like, hey, like I see you're in a tough situation. Like, do you need a place to stay? And it might on the surface at the beginning of that process, which is often called the grooming process, it often looks great. Like, helpful, and wanted, accepted. Yes, I do need a place to stay. Yes, I do need food. I do have a child with me, that needs a place to sleep tonight, and I'll do anything to secure my child. And we know that traffickers are using that type of vulnerability to rope people into a place, to where they are forced to work. They're trafficked. Precisely. Yeah. That's it. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So asylum seekers end up in situations where, their vulnerabilities are pretty easy to pick up.
Yeah.
And so for somebody who is bent on taking advantage of someone, it's going to be pretty, they're going to pick up the vulnerabilities pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it's not going to take very long to see that. And then the other thing too is if you're here as an asylum seeker, a lot of times people don't understand. The asylum seekers themselves don't understand what rights they have. Kind of in terms of the law.
Sure.
So what that means is, if I end up in a situation where I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, or something's happening that I don't want to be happening to me, a lot of times there's this fear of, can I even call the cops? Can I even say something?
Yeah.
I mean, most people, if you're here and you don't have any money, you don't even have a cell phone. So even if you wanted to call the cops, how do you call?
Right.
So there's a lot of those things too. But then there's also this thinking of, well, because technically I haven't been granted my asylum just yet. Does that mean if I call the cops,
I'm going back?
They're going to treat me as an illegal immigrant? And somebody who's trying to take advantage of that person is probably going to be saying things like, well, hey, you can call the cops if you want to, but that's bye-bye to you, if you do that. And so this lack of understanding, and then the language barriers for sure,
Sure,
play a big role in that, because at this point in time, maybe very few of them have even had an opportunity to sit down with an immigration attorney or an asylum lawyer. And so all the decisions you're making are based off of information you've heard from third parties or that you heard when you were in detention, hearsay and all of that stuff. So you don't have the real facts about, what you're entitled to as someone in the U.S. and what you're not in, what you should put up with, what you shouldn't. And so, and again, most times people, this person is not in the right frame of mind anyway, because of the trauma and the PTSD they're suffering. So, rational decisions don't always happen, unfortunately.
Absolutely. So where's the hope, Munatsi? Like what's like we've just described, like, bro, like sometimes we do the work, right? And like our work, your work, and it like the problem is so big. It's so vast. It's so like, and it feels like even though we have these like nonprofits that are doing great work and we're helping hundreds of people and like we're seeing success, it's like a drop in the bucket, drop in the ocean even. So for you, for Dash, for your team, and for the listeners and the viewers of this episode, like what is the hope? How do we keep moving forward in this work?
Oh man. I think for us, for our ministry and the work we do, the hope has to be Jesus.
It's got to be Jesus.
It has to be Jesus. I see no other solution. Beyond God, Jesus coming through and kind of just helping us with the work that we're doing. Because we're faced daily with some very difficult conversations, some just heart-wrenching and just depressing stuff, and I'll be honest, it weighs down on your spirit over time. All the stuff that's going on, and just when you think you've heard the worst story the worst story you've ever heard, it's like it doesn't take very long before it's like I'm gonna one up you on that one. Because of the evil that's in the world, but ultimately that's the hope, is Christ, and just the understanding that with all the chaos and the brokenness of the world, that ultimately, it's all going to end, and there's going to be healing, for every one of us. There's going to be restoration, and kind of that place of being put back together, us being made whole again, in our spirit, and us being able to be, with Christ and to be with God, and to not have to suffer again. I think that's the hope. In terms of the work that we do, we do get a lot of hope and encouragement from other organizations, like Elijah Rising and the work that you guys are doing, and other organizations that are helping. There's a lot of organizations we've gotten to know over the years that provide services to asylum seekers, right at the border. Most of them are short-term kind of shelters, but there's more and more people getting involved.
Great.
We had a couple of weeks ago, an organization, in I want to say Illinois, reached out to say, hey, look, we've heard about you guys and the model you guys are employing, and we want to start similar, organization here in Illinois to help asylum seekers. So can we share notes? Can you help us out? And so that's encouraging that more people are stepping up to get involved. We also get a lot of, encouragement from, the success stories, the asylum seekers that came, that had to stay with us for 3 or even 4 years because they, took that long for them to get their work permits and all of that. And eventually they get granted their asylum, and eventually they're able to start the process for their family, their wife and kids, or, husband and kids that they left back home to come to the United States. And they are, reunited, for the first time. We've had, we got to experience about 1.5 years ago, a man that had been in Daesh for I think 5 years even, and he hadn't seen his wife and kids in 5 or 6 years, and we got to be present, as he was waiting at Dallas Fort Worth Airport, and his wife and daughters, came out the airport, for the first time, and he's seeing them. I mean, you're talking about, last time he'd seen his kids, they were like 1 and 3. Now they're 7 and 9 or something like that. And I mean, just the emotion there and the crying and just all of that, but the celebration, and us knowing that, in some small way, God kind of allowed us to be a part of their journey, a part of their story. And in many ways, God used us to provide some of the stability and the support that they needed to kind of get through this really difficult situation. Yeah. And this particular, man I'm talking about, you can imagine our joy when a couple of months ago, he calls and says, "Oh, guys, guess what? We just bought a house." So now they've been working and they work really hard. Him and his wife and the kids are settled, and they just bought a home for the first time in the U.S. and things like that. So it's those stories. Now, unfortunately, because of how slow the asylum process plays out, we don't quite get to see those kind of or to feel those feelings frequently.
Yeah, right.
So drawn out. But we do savor them when those moments when they do happen. I mean, and then the small wins too. Just somebody saying, "Hey guys, I've got my asylum." That's a big thing, and we celebrate. Yeah. Hey guys, I finally got my work permit, and I got this job. My first job that I was working was paying me $10 an hour. I just got one now that's paying me $15 an hour. Praise God, I'm excited. Just those kinds of things that that we do get on a regular basis, and they do gotta give us hope and keep us going. And then also, I think when it comes to immigration, we're living at a time in the United States where that's such a divisive matter. Yeah. And we do get a lot of encouragement when other Christian brothers and sisters in churches are kind of stepping up to say, "Hey, look, we want to work with you guys and kind of help you guys and support your ministry, because the work you're doing is so important." And that also is very encouraging. So we just are looking for the for those moments of hope and the things that we can do. I mean, we're also at the same time having to trying to continuously encourage other people that we've had in Daesh that have been separated from their wives and spouses for 5 years and still haven't had much movement in terms of their families being able to be here, and they're frustrated. They're missing their kids' birthdays. They're missing, some just really, critical moments in their families' lives. When you come and you see, go through asylum, you aren't able to return to your home country for
of course,
until you're a U.S. citizen. So we're also dealing with people who lose their loved ones. Where, hey, my mom just died in my home country, and I can't go. All I can do is talk to someone on the phone. And just kind of trying to just deal with those real life, real difficult, kind of situations. So, so we look for the hope where we can find it. We certainly look for the hope in Scripture for sure, and kind of just get that encouragement there, and then we get people that are praying for us, that are sending notes to say, "Hey, I'm praying for you guys," and all this, and it's really, really encouraging. As we go about our work on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. We, in a similar way, we have to celebrate the small victories here too. You know what I mean? And you just have to keep your eyes on Jesus and that hope that is eternal, right? And hopefully you guys feel encouraged by us and to know that we're all in this work together. That's the nature of the kingdom of God, right? We're coming at, oppression and injustice from different directions and, in different fields, but we really are in this together. And so, Munatsi, I appreciate you spending the afternoon with us and sharing, educating, really. I think that's the majority of what you've done today is you've done a lot of educating, and there are clearly overlaps in our work. And so I just appreciate your voice. I appreciate the sacrifice that you make on a daily basis to lay your life down for the sake of others, to ensure that they are safe and that those vulnerabilities are reduced so that they're not further exploited here in our home, right here in our country. So I want to give you just some time here at the end. Just like tell us, how can people find Dash? How can they support your work? Anything you want to tell them about that you guys are doing? Website, etc.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. If anyone out there would like to connect with us or learn more about what we do, or get involved in some way, we are active on Facebook. You just search Dash Network. You'll find us on Instagram as well, Dash Network. And then but our primary source of information and kind of get word out about what's going on is our website, and you'll find that at www.dashnetwork.net. Please, if you have time, just check that out. There's a couple of stories on there you can see as well, and just learn more about what we do. If you are interested in this kind of work, and you don't have to be in the DFW area at all, we do regularly what we call Dash 101s, which are kind of an opportunity for people that want to learn more about Dash, about asylum seekers and how to help them. And we kind of talk through how that can happen. So even if you aren't in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but you wanted to learn more, now there's different ways that you can kind of get involved and you can connect. And we have, volunteers now that are doing work virtually entirely. So there's ways that you can get involved.
Awesome.
So you can reach out to us on our website or through any of on our Facebook page, and we'll be very quick to contact you to come back to you to set something up. If you're in the Fort Worth area, Dallas area, and you'd like to become an advocate, kind of just a friend to asylum seekers, if you want to become a grocery volunteer, if you have an extra bedroom in your house and would be open to hosting a young woman from a foreign country, for example, we'd love to have a conversation about that. We also have events on a regular basis that we do to kind of just help people learn more about what we're doing, but also give people opportunities to meet asylum seekers and get to know them as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that's always really special whenever we're able to do that. Yeah. We also are always willing to looking for donations.
Sure.
That can be financial donations, and you can you can donate through our website. If you wanted to do that. We also have on our website kind of a mailing address. If somebody wanted to mail a check, they could do that.
Perfect.
And then we're also looking for people donating household items. So all the apartments we set up, we get donations of all the furniture, so we don't have to use our budget, kind of for furniture and that kind of thing. So we need help with that. Whenever somebody graduates from Dash, so they've got their work permit and have worked for 6 months and been able to save up for their own apartment, we also reach out to to our community to set up their apartment. So they're paying for that apartment, but we make sure that everything they need is is provided as they move in, just so they don't have to it's stressful enough saving first and last month's rent and all of that stuff, and trying to buy a car and all this stuff in 6 months, that we just trying to lessen the burden on people. So if you want to get involved in any of that, please just reach out to us. We'd love to talk with you. And then we're also kind of at a place where at the moment we've been providing, our housing through apartments that we rent. And, through our board now, we're starting to kind of look for a piece of land that we could buy. Hopefully build our own, accommodation units. So
awesome.
Working on that and, trying to, get that going. So if you can get involved, if you want to help with that, or if you have any contacts, please just reach out to us. We would really appreciate any help we can get.
That's excellent. Well, Munatsi, thanks again for spending time with us today. And I just, again, want to say thank you for the work that you do. And
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and really love the work you guys are doing too. And we'll be planning for you guys as well. Yeah.
All right. We'll see you on the next episode of the Elijah Rising podcast.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode. If you were inspired by this content today, please share, rate, and leave a review. Also, please consider making a donation at elijahrising.org/donate. Your support helps us continue the vital mission to combat sex trafficking. Until next time.